Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Skule Alumni Podcast series. Today, we are joined by Mehran. Mehran, please introduce yourself.
Sounds good. Hey everyone, my name is Mehran Haidari. I'm an EC 124 plus PEY. I am currently a board of directors member on the board for the Engineering Alumni Network, and I lead the Alumni Engagement Committee. We have some exciting stuff coming up, but more on that later, I guess.
Would you be able to discuss your career path starting from your graduation until where you are now?
Sure. So I'm currently a product manager at UNICEF's Office of Innovation. I work specifically with cryptocurrency and blockchain, and we look at how we can apply it to some of the work that UNICEF does, which is a UN agency that focuses on children emergencies around the world. But our team also works with other UN agencies and governments around the world in a variety of different capacities, and our team gets pulled in from a cryptocurrency and blockchain advisory perspective. So the role is product manager, but it's a lot more than that. How I got here, so I did a few internships during my time at the university. My first one was at Advanced Micro Devices, or AMD for short. And while I was there, I did a fairly technical role. We were testing, I guess, computer chips that were going to be placed in the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One at the time. And I did a lot of coding and it was fun. And then after 8 months, I got another opportunity to work at Hydro One. And I was doing my I guess specialization in electrical engineering with power systems. And so I was like, okay, Hydro One, which is a transmission and distribution company, I think. I don't know what they do anymore, but back then they were doing a lot of power distribution in Ontario and Toronto. And so I was like, this is a good opportunity for me to exercise the stuff that I'm learning. When I did join the team, I actually worked on a policy and standards team. And so my role was actually very business in nature. And so I got my first taste in being a technical person in, I guess, a fairly engineering environment. And so that kicked off, I guess, my career path in this kind of pseudo tech business world. So after I graduated, I was looking to get into software and my coding skills weren't great. So I spent the first 4 months after I graduated learning how to code, but not the stuff that we learned in university. It was more like, how do we build products? And so because I did electrical engineering in my last 2 years, I didn't get a lot of opportunities to build mobile applications or desktop applications that we're all used to using nowadays. And so I spent a few months doing that. And then a few months after that, I started as a consultant at Deloitte. And when I was there, I did very non-engineering work to start. Which was good because I think I did need to ramp up some of my business skills. And so the first thing that I did, I joined a team that was helping Canadian banks acquire smaller banks in the US. And so some of you may know in 2008, there was a financial crisis. A lot of the banks collapsed because of something that went wrong with how they were doing the banking and issuing loans. And so there's a lot of policy and standards that were introduced. And so a lot of the smaller banks in America couldn't afford to, I guess, meet the new standard for banking. And Canadian banks, there's the 5 big ones, and they're sitting on a lot of cash. And so they're like, hey, why don't you just join us and you'll fall under our policy and standards that they did eventually implement. And so I did a few of those projects. I got very savvy from a business side. What that means is giving presentations, talking to senior stakeholders, building PowerPoints, and all the fun stuff, I guess, from a consulting world. And then at a certain point, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm noticing that the firm that I was working for, which was Deloitte, was shifting towards somewhere in the software realm. So they're like, okay, we see that there's value here. We see that most of the world is moving towards software. Software is eating the world. And so there was a team there called Deloitte Digital, and essentially they used to build mobile and web applications. And so I did a few projects on the side, I guess. So, when you're in school, you do your schoolwork, and then on the side, you're doing clubs or you're volunteering. And so that for me at Deloitte was working with Deloitte Digital on little projects to get more exposure to like, how does a consulting company actually play in the software space? And so I was doing the mergers and acquisitions work for my core work, and then on the side, after work or late into the nights, I was working with my friends or some of my managers to get the business software skills that I needed to eventually make the transition to my next team. And so after my first year, I think like after my first year, there was an interesting interaction I had with a friend. My friend was working on the cryptocurrency blockchain team that Deloitte had. And in our main lobby, we actually had a Bitcoin ATM downstairs. And so, we were leaving the office together, and I asked her, I was like, hey, how do you use this thing? And she walked me through how to exchange a $20 bill to some Bitcoin that would show up on my phone. And I was fascinated by the tech, and I was like, hey, can you introduce me to a few people on your team? And one thing led to another, and eventually, I think essentially what was happening was there was a team at Deloitte focusing on blockchain and crypto, but then they built a software as like a service, but then Deloitte is platform agnostic or software agnostic. So they're like, okay, this is a good solution, but you can't build it here. And so they asked that team to spin off and become their own company. But then when that happened, a lot of the, I guess, talent on the blockchain team left at that time. And so, I was like new to the space, but I had some consulting skills. I had my engineering background, and I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity for me to step in and, start working with a few others that were left behind to build out this new practice in a sense. And so my next 2 years at Deloitte, so I spent 3 years there. So the first year I did mergers and acquisitions. My second year there, I did a lot of blockchain and cryptocurrency work. Anything you can think about from a consulting perspective, I was there. So we were on the client side implementing projects. We were advising clients to help them identify where the technology fits into their business. Before we actually met with clients, we were doing like industry analysis to see like, what does blockchain look like in aerospace? What does blockchain look like in the banking industry? Creating presentations and doing like cold calls with different clients to show them like, here's what we can do. Some clients were interested in more practical examples. And so we had like little tech teams building software prototypes to show them like, okay, this is what happens if you do this with blockchain and whatnot. And so it was a very intensive year, a lot of fun. And I think, after 2 years of that, I was like, okay, this is cool. I get to see crypto and blockchain from a corporate enterprise perspective. But then I was like, I want to get into the space where the technology is being applied to a more global audience and through, I guess, some of the more open technologies. And so when enterprises were looking at blockchain, they were looking at how do we keep it closed? How do we keep it beneficial to our clients and our customers and maybe some of our competitors? But I was more interested in technologies that were powering the Bitcoin blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain, which are open source. Anyone can use it. Anyone can access it. And so UNICEF actually approached me and they're like, hey, we're actually building a cryptocurrency and blockchain team with these two technologies to start our explorations. Are you interested in helping out? And so I joined a team that started 3 months before I joined. And yeah, that's kind of like how I got to UNICEF.
That's really cool. And so we're curious about like how the transition was between sort of the corporate side at Deloitte to the nonprofit world at UNICEF.
Yeah, it was an interesting kind of transition. So UNICEF in a sense is still a very large organization. Fun fact, they're actually, I think, if not the largest, one of the largest purchasers of vaccines around the world. And they have like a multi-billion-dollar budget as well. So UNICEF plays a lot of roles in getting vaccines, distributing it to places around the world that normally have difficulties accessing vaccines at a reasonable price, at a reasonable rate, all that kind of stuff. So it's still like working in enterprise. So a lot of processes, a lot of big teams, etc. But the team that I was joining was the Office of Innovation, and so it was like working at a startup at the UN is how I would put it. And so, you know, a lot of the processes were there, but once our team was kind of introduced, and our team has a pretty long history, and maybe we can talk about that later. But we were just given like this mandate where it's like, go explore blockchain. You guys tell us what we should do with it, right? And so we have an innovation lead, and they have, you know, other innovation areas that they're looking at, and they kind of push us, you know, in some direction. But a lot of the research that we did really helped dictate what the UN and a lot of the governments we work with eventually are ending up doing. So the slowness is there, but the curiosity and patience is also there. So it's interesting, right? Because you think that enterprises would be leading a lot of this work, but at least in Canada, I think they're more risk averse, right? They're like, okay, here's this global currency. We don't know what it can do yet, so let's wait and see. Whereas our team at UNICEF, we're just like, let's try it out, and it might fail, right? But we'll take the proper precautions to make sure that if we do fail, like we learn the most that we can. And so that's kind of where our team's positioned right now.
Would you be able to describe like some of the projects you're currently working on at UNICEF?
Sure. So the blockchain team at UNICEF has 3 mandates. The first one is for learning. So we work closely with UNICEF and all the teams within it, but we also work with other UN agencies. And you know, prior to COVID-19, our team was actually on the ground, going to different countries and setting up like events. And the things that we would do with all these different groups is we would teach them the fundamentals of blockchain and cryptocurrency. And then depending on the level of interest, so you know, when we would go to the countries and actually do like a week-long event, we would engage the youth in that area. We would teach them the fundamentals of the technology, maybe day 1, day 2. We would engage the blockchain ecosystem in that region, and then they would build or design things with the technology to solve problems in their own area. So that's kind of like the full scope of it. But you know, on the flip side, we have shorter courses. So a lot of UN agencies will engage us, and they were like, hey, like, what are you guys doing? Can you teach us what blockchain 101 is? Can you teach us how to use a blockchain wallet? Can you teach us how to do all these slightly more technical things? So it's not just like, here's what the tech can do, but here's what the tech can do, and here's how you can get involved. And through that, you know, so one of the products that we have on our learning team as a result of that is this solution called Atrium. And so I would say like everyone's blockchain journey is fairly similar, right? So they go on Google, they look up Bitcoin, they're like, what is Bitcoin? I can capture value and exchange value across the world without any intermediaries or parties in between blocking my Bitcoin payment. And then the next thing that they realize is that they can not only apply this to money, they can apply this to data. And then a lot of government agencies are like, okay, so I can track data in this new way. What can I do with it? Right. And then they start looking at identity solutions. They look at payment solutions. They look at supply chains. So there's a lot of common things that people start exploring. And so what the Atrium is, it's essentially a web app. And then the web app allows different UN agencies to jump on and share their learnings, right? So if there's documents that they have, if there's papers or projects that they've worked on behalf of UNICEF or on behalf of World Economic Forum or World Food Program or other UN agencies, they can go onto the platform and share what they've been working on. And then that web application also has a forum capability so that, say UNICEF has a question about how identity could be captured on blockchain and maybe World Food Program has done some work in that space. This interagency platform allows people to collaborate from a crypto and blockchain perspective. So that's one thing. The second pillar that we have is in the prototyping realm. So we build a lot of small things and sometimes they catch on and then they scale very quickly. And so one of the things we were looking at was, can UNICEF be an organization that uses cryptocurrencies to do business? And so I think they asked that question, on a whim a few years ago. And then once our team came in and we had the full-time capacity to explore crypto and blockchain, just last year, I think in 2019, like towards the end, we launched a cryptocurrency fund. And so UNICEF and a lot of the UN agencies are agencies that are funded through donors. And so we're like, hey, there's a lot of new money flowing into the crypto space. Wouldn't it be cool if we had crypto wallets to accept Bitcoin donations, to accept donations in Ether, which is another cryptocurrency? And then, we were able to do that portion. And then the cool part of actually implementing that cryptocurrency fund was, and I guess this is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but our innovation team has an investment fund where we invest in startups around the world to explore open source tech. And so normally we give those investments in US dollar, and then the startups work with us for a year, and then they develop open source software that can be used around the world. That's kind of the trade-off. We don't take equity or anything like that. We're just like, whatever you build with this funding has to be open source. And so when we launched the crypto fund, we engaged some of the startups. We're like, hey, do you want additional funding in crypto? You continue to build open source software with us. So in 2019, we kicked it off with 3 startups. And then last year in the summer, we sent crypto to like 12 startups in crypto as well. And so a lot of interesting work happening there. They're taking the payments in crypto, they're paying their employees, they're paying their vendors and all that kind of stuff, which is cool to see as well. The third pillar that we have is advisory. Yes, it's advisory. And so we have a fairly technical team at the Office of Innovation. So we have a team of 5 or 6 people, and we have a very strong dev team. We have strong strategists and designers that have worked with blockchain products. And some of them have come from like startups that have worked specifically on blockchain wallets and that kind of stuff in the early days. And given that the blockchain industry is like fairly young, even if these people work 2-3 years, like they're like top of their class, which is a cool team to be a part of. But with that expertise, we actually have a lot of other teams around the world that are building blockchain, and then they'll come to us to help them scope out their projects or validate what they're building. And so the investment fund that I was talking about, we invest in startups, but then UNICEF Kazakhstan, for example, they came to us and they're like, hey, we want to use blockchain to optimize a certain part of our business. Does this use case make sense, right? And so our team will step in, we'll be like, yeah, this is cool, or this needs work, and eventually come up with a work plan that they can take. We'll give them the funding, and then they can hire vendors in Kazakhstan. They can do the project management, and they'll do all of that stuff. But our team does, at a high level, just advise to make sure that they're not building completely weird things or things that aren't relevant to blockchain per se. So Kazakhstan recently did something like that, and countries approach us all the time, or different UN agencies come to us all the time. They're like, hey, does this blockchain thing make sense? And our team will help them get to an answer.
Yeah, that's really cool hearing about all the experiences that you've had with just blockchain at UNICEF, as well as your past life. And we were just curious about whether or not you have any tips that you would like to share to some of our listeners that are current university students here at the University of Toronto for engineering.
Sure, that's a fairly broad question. So I think once you start getting comfortable with school, it's very important to start trying things that you think you might like, and be ready to fail. I think once you get comfortable with failing, so say you think you like to paint and then you suck at painting, like that's okay. Say you want to try to make a startup, and then the startup catches a lot of traction, and then in 1 or 2 months you can't deliver. Like that kind of stuff is great to learn early on, because it helps you build resiliency. It helps identify your strengths and weaknesses. And the sooner that you can find those things out, the sooner that you can kind of work on them and kind of tailor what you're doing in your career based on those learnings, right? Instead of having people tell you what to do, I think it's always great to take that first step and figure out, what you like to do by trying out a bunch of different things. I know it's tricky with COVID-19, making a lot of events remote or online, or maybe they're not happening at all. But what I really encourage people to do is find that online medium that is doing the thing that you think you want to try right now, right? So there are online classes, there are hackathons, there are learnathons. There's so many different events that are happening online for now, but it will continue in hopefully the next year or so in person. So start those journeys now and don't look back. I think, it took me a few years to kind of start things. My first 2 years at university were tough, but eventually I was like, you know what, I should just do it. And I wish I'd started sooner. So that's all I'll say. The other thing, I guess it's more personal. If you're in college or university and you have the summers off, try to look for an internship or try to do a semester abroad or something like that. People say that life does get busy after work or after school is done. And in a sense it does, right? You can't just take 4 months off. You can't just take 3-4 months off. Eventually you'll be able to do that. But I think for your first 3-4 years of your career, you should be like heads down and kind of grinding to, solidify your position in the workforce. And then you can start doing all those things. So I think, you can either wait 5 years after you graduate, or you can kind of pursue a lot of those things that take time now. So like studying abroad or traveling to a different country. There's a lot of funding resources out there through the university, through scholarships and stuff. So just use the internet to your advantage. And if you don't find it at university or in Canada, like engage external resources, you'll probably find resources to help you pursue these types of things.
Thank you once again, Mehran, for joining us and for speaking about your work and experiences. To our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode and that you gained some valuable insight. Please continue to listen to the rest of the podcast series as we interview more U of T engineering alumni.